Hi, my name's Verena and my mom left me on my grandpa's porch when I was 6, said she'd be back after sorting things out. She never came. Years later, she sued me for stealing the $4.5 million inheritance from the same man who raised me when she didn't. They told the court I manipulated him. They called me a usurper. But there's one thing they didn't expect: the tape Grandpa left behind. And what he said on it changed everything. What kind of mother looks you in the eye and says you stole what should have been hers? Let me know when you're ready to plug this into the full video flow. The crunch of gravel under tires still echoes in my memory, sharper than the autumn air that bit through my jacket that night. I was 6. The kind of 6 that still believed in bedtime kisses and magic tucked under pillows. The headlights went off, and her voice came out flat, mechanical, like reading from a manual she'd rehearsed too long. "You'll be safe here, baby." Safe. She didn't hug me, didn't get out of the car. Just left me standing on the edge of the driveway with a duffel bag and my stuffed rabbit. The engine didn't idle. She was already in reverse before I could answer. Tail lights faded into the darkness like a closing curtain. The screen door creaked, then stopped halfway. Grandpa Harlan stood there, framed by porch light and shadow. He didn't ask anything, just nodded once and motioned me in. His old mutt barked once, looked at me, and dropped back down by the heater vent. Inside smelled like wood smoke and something frying. Not a word from Grandpa, only, "We'll talk later." And that was it. Later never came that night. He showed me to a small room tucked down the hallway. Everything looked like it had been there since the 70s. Floral bedsheets. A chipped nightstand with a lamp that clicked twice before lighting. The mattress creaked when I sat. I clutched my rabbit tight, and when Grandpa handed me a silver pocket watch, I didn't ask why. I didn't even look up. If I was so bad she had to leave me here, I thought, why didn't she say goodbye? I lay on my side, counting each tick of that watch, every 1 second she didn't turn around. The house made noises: old wood, old pipes, old loneliness. I counted past 100 ticks. Then 500. Then I lost track. Next morning, I woke to bacon and eggs, but no conversation. Grandpa didn't say, "How'd you sleep?" or, "You okay?" Just pointed to a plate, then to the boots by the door. "You'll help with chores today." He said it like a fact, not a question. And that was fine with me. We didn't talk much that day. We shoveled hay, fed the chickens, fixed a loose fence post. My boots were 2 sizes too big. I kept tripping in the mud, but I didn't complain. Instead, I told myself I'd grow into them. That's the kind of thing a kid thinks when no one tells her otherwise. Inside, by the fireplace, I saw a photograph I hadn't noticed before. A young man in uniform. Brown eyes like mine. "Who's that?" I asked. "My son," he said. "Your uncle. Gone now." That was all he said. Grief sat in that room like another piece of furniture, unchanged, unmoved. Weeks slid by, all shaped like the last. I learned to stack wood, feed calves, sweep the porch. The silence started to feel less sharp. I'd talk to the chickens sometimes, just to hear my own voice. One evening in December, he brought down a box labeled Christmas. Inside were a few dusty ornaments, some string lights, and an old photo album. I was flipping through it while he hung a wreath on the door. I found the page marked Family Christmas 1995. There were 5 people in the photo: my mom, dad, uncle, Grandma May, and a small girl. The label under the photo had everyone's name. Except one. Where my name should have been, it was scratched out. Not just crossed out. Scraped away like someone took time doing it. Even my face, blurred by a greasy thumbprint or something worse. I asked him, "Why is my name gone?" He looked at me too long before answering. "Not everything in that book tells the truth," he said. Then he turned off the lights and walked to his room. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I lay under that same floral blanket, holding the pocket watch tight to my chest. The ticking sounded louder, clearer. "She's not coming back, is she?" I whispered to no one. And as I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that watch press into my skin, a different kind of knowing settled in. That was the moment I stopped waiting and started counting. It was one of those bitter afternoons where even the sky seemed to have given up on warmth. The wind cut through every layer of clothing, but Grandpa and I kept working. He needed help patching a wall inside the old barn, the one where the boards buckled just above the feed bins. I held the nails in my palm, and he hammered with slow, deliberate strikes, like each thud had a memory behind it. While removing a warped plank, I spotted something caught between the insulation and the slats. A pale envelope, frayed on the corners, yellowed with time. I reached in and pulled it free. It was addressed to my mother. No stamp, never mailed. Grandpa barely looked over. "Old junk," he muttered, turning back to the hammer. I slipped it into my jacket pocket without another word. Later, in the quiet of my room, I opened it. His handwriting was rough, pressed hard into the paper like he'd written through gritted teeth. It wasn't kind. It was desperate. He'd written to her, my mother, begging her not to do what she did to the others. He warned her that abandoning a child leaves scars that time won't cover. He mentioned names I'd never heard before. He ended with, "Don't turn her into a ghost like you did them." I read it twice, then a third time. The weight of it sank in slowly, like a chill leaking under a door. The others? Who were they? The next few days, I didn't ask direct questions. Just nudged around the edges. How many kids did Grandma May have, or was Mom the oldest? He dodged like a boxer, busy fixing fences, oiling tools, feeding livestock that didn't need feeding. One morning, I passed a dusty photo frame on the mantel. It was a family gathering. Grandpa, Grandma May, and someone that might have been my uncle. No Mom. I turned the frame over. Nothing written. That same day, the mailman came by, same guy every week, in a red truck that coughed more than it ran. He waved and said, "Still just you two out here, huh?" "Still just us," I said, even though the words tasted bitter. I started writing in an old composition book I found in the guest room closet. Black and white marbled cover. Inside, I wrote one sentence. "Truth doesn't rot in walls. It waits." Nights stretched longer. The furnace groaned louder. Grandpa's dog started barking every night at the same time, toward the old tool shed. That place was always locked. One night, I waited until Grandpa thought I was asleep. I wrapped myself in my coat, slipped outside, and followed him through the dark yard. His breath hung like smoke in the air. He stopped at the payphone nailed to the outside wall of the workshop. He spoke in whispers, urgent, tense. "She doesn't know yet," I heard him say. I didn't wait to hear more. I backed away before he turned and hurried to bed, but I didn't sleep. I started keeping notes of every strange thing, locked sheds, missing photos, late-night calls. My book filled fast. A few days later, a manila envelope came in the mail, addressed to Harlan Quince. The return address was from a law office. I intercepted it, slipped it under my coat before Grandpa saw. Inside was a revised will. Neatly typed, signed, dated. My name wasn't there. Not even a mention. I stared at the paper so long my eyes blurred. I wasn't supposed to see this, but I had. And it told me everything I needed. When I confronted him, he didn't yell. Didn't scold. He just stood by the wood stove and said, "Some names are more dangerous to keep than to erase." I didn't cry, but something inside me split. The version of me that believed this place could become home, she was gone. That night, I wrote something new in my journal. If they can cross me out on paper, I'll write myself back in where it hurts most, their legacy. After midnight, I returned to the barn with the same envelope from the wall. I tucked the original letter back behind the board, just where I'd found it. But I added something. A note in my own handwriting. "One day, they'll dig this up and understand." Then I walked to the tool shed. Grandpa had left his spare key in the kitchen drawer. I knew where he kept everything by now. I opened the shed, stepped inside, and slid the revised will into a rusted metal box under the workbench. Locked the shed tight. Slipped the key back before sunrise. I wasn't just a guest anymore, I had become the ghost they tried to forget. The house had never been this quiet. Not even during the storms when the wind howled through the trees, or in summer when the air got so still you could hear the cows breathing. This was different. I woke up to silence so deep it felt like a warning. I couldn't explain what pulled me out of sleep, but when I opened my eyes, the clock in the hallway had stopped. No ticking, just stillness. I got up, rubbed my arms against the cold, and padded down the hallway. The moonlight spilled in, casting soft blue shadows over the old wallpaper. The antique clock, Grandpa's pride, the one he used to wind every Saturday, hung crooked, pendulum frozen in mid-swing. I stepped closer. The hands had stopped at 3:17 a.m. In the living room, Grandpa stood near the window, one hand clutching the phone, the other resting on the sill. His back was straight, still, like he'd been standing there for hours. I didn't say a word. Then I caught a flicker of headlights. A car pulled out from the barn drive. My father's SUV. Tail lights vanished into the dark. Grandpa lowered the phone, sighed so deeply I heard his ribs creak. "Some things freeze before the snow even settles," he muttered. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't. I went back to my room and lay awake till dawn, listening for the clock to start again. It didn't. A week later, I started cleaning the old office by the kitchen. The walls smelled like must and varnish. Yellowed papers and mouse-eaten boxes were piled to the ceiling. That's where I found it. A binder labeled Quince Farm, Labor Agreements 1994 to 98. The name alone made my stomach tighten. I opened it. Inside were page after page of signatures, wages, work logs. My mother's name stood out like ink in snow, listed as the manager of every labor contract. She'd never worked the fields. Never stood in line at sunrise waiting for the daily assignments. Never shoveled manure or cut rows of corn in the July heat. I sat down hard on the old wooden chair. I turned to the back, to the signature pages. Coffee rings bled into the margins. Some lines were scratched out. Edits made in haste, some names overwritten. I could feel the lie right through the paper. Later that afternoon, I took a walk to Bertie May's trailer. She was hanging wet laundry, her fingers cracked from cold. I handed her a thermos of soup and asked, "Did you know my mother was listed on the farm contracts?" Bertie didn't look surprised. "Honey," she said, folding a towel, "she signed it in ink." But my work was dirt and sweat, not hers. I couldn't stop staring at the ground. Why would she do that? Because it paid, and it kept the books neat for the courthouse. Back at the house, I laid the binder on the dining table. I didn't say anything, just left it open where Grandpa could see. But he never mentioned it. Not once. 2 nights later, I heard the phone again. I crept down the hallway, stopped just out of sight. Grandpa's voice was low, careful. "Yes, the hourglass broke," he said. "You'll proceed as planned." He paused. "The papers. And the deed." "No, she doesn't know yet." I must have shifted, because the floorboard creaked. Silence. I held my breath, not daring to move. Back in my room, I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed, turned the silver pocket watch over in my hands. It had once felt like a gift. Now it ticked like a bomb. That old photo album, the one where my name was scratched out of Christmas, '89, came back to me. This wasn't paranoia. This was a pattern. The next day, I waited until the sun dipped low. The cold outside settled in the barn like an extra coat. Grandpa was by the back wall, fixing a saddle strap. I stepped inside, kept my voice steady. "Did you sign something that didn't include me?" He didn't turn, just finished buckling the leather, then slowly closed the barn door with one hand. It creaked and clicked shut behind me. "Some clocks count the hours you live," he said, voice low. "Others count the hours you're forgotten." He didn't look up, didn't offer more. I walked away. That night, after he went to bed, I returned to the office. The safe was small, tucked behind old curtains. I'd opened it before and found nothing. This time, there was one sheet of paper. Just one. Folded clean, edges sharp. 3:17 a.m., trust broken, journal begins now. I tucked it into my coat pocket. As I stepped into the hallway, my eyes found the clock. Stopped. Again. Same time. 3:17. I found the envelope half buried in the stack of seed catalogs and gas bills. Just another envelope at first glance, until I saw the certified stamp and the name typed in cold, formal print. Harlan Quince Estate. No mention of me. My hands shook as I tore it open by the mailbox, gravel crunching under my boots. Inside was a court filing, petition to contest will, LaCroix versus Quince Estate. I froze. My mother's name was scrawled across the bottom of the page. My mother. The woman who left, who'd told everyone she moved on. Now she was coming back not for me, but for what Grandpa had meant for me. I walked back to the house slowly, letter clutched tight. Grandpa stood by the sink, washing coffee mugs like he always did after lunch. He didn't look at me. Just said, "They're tipping the scales, Ren." I swallowed hard. "I know." He nodded, rinsing the last mug. "Then it's time to stand." The next day, the high school auditorium buzzed with chatter and folding chairs screeching across linoleum. A banner hung crooked over the stage, "Community Builders, celebrating local legacies." I'd gotten the invite in the mail. Figured it was for Grandpa. I went out of respect. But as they pulled the cloth off the plaque, I saw the truth carved in bronze. Blythe Farm, 50 years of service. Underneath it, Patricia LaCroix and Daniel LaCroix. My parents. And then, in honor, Harlan Quince. That was it. No mention of me. I stood in the back of the auditorium, coat zipped tight, hands buried in my pockets. Someone handed my mother a microphone. She smiled like she hadn't erased a whole part of her life. My life. The room clapped politely. I didn't. I slipped out before they finished the speeches, stepped into the hallway and leaned against the cold cinderblock wall. Pulled out the silver watch from my pocket. Its ticking seemed sharper in the echo of that school. They wanted to bury me in history, pretend I never held a shovel, never milked the cows, never pulled a double shift during Grandpa's surgery. They could pretend. I wouldn't. 2 nights later, I stood outside the LaCroix house. Clean brick, new lawn furniture, catered food trays visible through the windows. Family gathering, some kind of celebration. I wasn't told what for. My name tag said, "Guest for Ren Quince." Guest. Dad was by the fireplace, half listening to some guy drone on about soybean futures. Mom laughed too loud with 2 local councilmen. I sat down at a table near the hallway. Round table, cloth napkins, perfect forks. My spot was at the edge, next to the coat rack. This wasn't my family table. Not really. I touched the watch in my coat pocket and remembered Grandpa's voice. "Control your time, Ren." I stood up and walked to the bathroom. Locked the door. Stared at myself in the mirror. This wasn't sadness anymore, it was steel forming under skin. If they weren't going to open the door, I'd make one myself. Back at the farmhouse that same night, I pulled out Grandpa's old laptop. It wheezed awake like it hadn't been touched in months. I opened a new document. I started writing. Every omission, every document, every erased credit, every contract where my name vanished. I scanned the high school plaque photo and attached it. Then the will, the version I'd kept, the one Grandpa made me copy onto a flash drive 2 years back. I typed until my fingers cramped. Then I whispered to the screen, "I will claim back what they never gave me." And I hit send. It went straight to Whitman Drayton's office. Grandpa's old lawyer. The only man I trusted to read between lines and fight in court without flinching. I didn't sleep much. Lying in bed later that night, I held the pocket watch in both hands. The ticking was louder now. Almost urgent. At 2:11 a.m., my phone buzzed. Text from Whitman. Court date set, April 15 to 9 a.m. I didn't blink, just stared at it. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about being seen. The storm rolled in slow, gray and humming. By the time the lightning cracked, the lights had already flickered out. I grabbed a lantern from the pantry and made my way up to the attic. I wasn't looking for answers. Just candles. The air up there was thick, and the dust clung to my sleeves. I pushed past boxes marked, Christmas, 85, Quince, legal, old coats, until one tucked in the back caught my eye, Q family memorabilia. Buried under a stack of old tax returns and brittle yearbooks was an envelope, yellowed, taped shut, stamped with a red, "Return to sender 1987. The flap was already peeled. I opened it, slow like it might crack apart. Grandpa's handwriting. I recognized it right away, firm strokes, all caps in some places where his nerves used to fail him. It was addressed to my mother. "She deserves better than silence. She is not your burden. She is your mirror." That line stopped me cold. I sat there on the attic floor, the lantern dimming by the minute, reading the letter over and over until I could have recited it in my sleep. It hit me, there was a time when Grandpa fought for me. But something, somewhere, had made him stop. Maybe it was her threats. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe the same silence that always swallowed women like me in this family. I whispered to the attic walls, I wonder if she even opened this. The power stayed out all night. So did sleep. The next morning, sunlight poured in like nothing had happened. I stayed in the office most of the day, sorting through old family tapes, trying to digitize them for court. Proof. Always needing proof. I pulled one marked, Wedding, Q&L 1992. That was the year I wore the flower girl dress Grandma sewed herself. Pale green satin, with tiny hand-stitched daisies. I remembered standing in that aisle. I remembered dropping petals. But the footage didn't. The tape opened with guests arriving then cut. Clean. No flower girl. When it resumed, it was the reception. My cousins laughing. Mom toasting with someone whose name I'd forgotten. Her smile was wide. My face, nowhere. They'd edited me out. It wasn't bad memory. It was erasure. I stared at the screen, the static hissing between cuts. Then I saw my own reflection in the black glass. Pale, hollow-eyed. I didn't cry. I just grabbed my journal and wrote, "Erasing a child is violence in slow motion." I screamed into my pillow until my throat burned. Then I stopped. Silence again. At dusk, when the heat finally let up, I took Grandpa's old shovel out to the garden. Walked to the furthest corner, where Grandma's marigolds used to bloom. The dirt was drier than I remembered. I dug until my arms ached. Then I placed the tape, the letter, and a photo of me from when I was 6, standing barefoot in the creek, into the hole. "If I was never meant to be in your story," I said, "I'll write my own in the dirt." I covered it, packed it down, pressed the earth flat, then I marked it with a rusted spoon from the kitchen drawer. The one no one used but never threw away. It felt right, not like closure, but like a line drawn. I was done waiting for apologies that were never coming. That night, I lit a candle on the kitchen table and opened my journal again. The silence felt different now, heavier, but mine. I thought of Bertie May. Her voice came back clear as day. They never wrote me in, but I still worked every day. Her words hit different now. Another woman made invisible. But still breathing, still standing. I pulled the old county phone book off the shelf and found her last address in Grinnell. I wrote a letter. Didn't ask her for help. Didn't beg her for stories. I just wrote, "You saw me. I remember." It was the truest thing I'd put on paper in a long time. When morning came, I stepped out to the porch with my coffee. A breeze rolled through the trees. Felt peaceful. Then I saw it. Right there on the step, a single VHS tape. My stomach dropped. Taped to the top was a folded note, typewritten. No signature. "You think we didn't keep copies?" My fingers went cold. They'd found the burial. Or maybe they'd always known. I stood there, holding the case like it was a loaded gun. But it didn't feel like power. It felt like a warning. The church hall was already half full when I walked in. The scent of baked beans, corn casserole, and coffee made the air feel thicker than it already was. It was the annual harvest potluck, one of the few events Grandpa never missed. Even when he was too tired to stand, he'd sit by the entrance, shaking hands, tipping his hat, thanking folks for coming. This year, I came alone. She was already there. My mother, dressed like nothing ever cracked, laughing with Mrs. Harlow near the coffee table, making herself the center of something she hadn't lifted a finger to build. When they called Grandpa's name for a tribute, people clapped. A slideshow flickered on the projector. One neighbor mentioned how he always believed in second chances. My mother leaned toward me, just low enough for no one else to hear, and hissed, "He always was more farmer than father." Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. I didn't answer, just sat there, heart pounding in my throat. Across the aisle, Mrs. Baird caught my eyes. Her brows knit, concern etched into the creases of her face. She must have heard it, or maybe she just read my expression. I excused myself before the tears came. Out back, behind the church near the playground, I sat on the swing meant for toddlers and stared at the dirt. Even in public, I whispered, "She makes sure I remember my place," just beneath her disappointment. That night, I stayed up late going through Grandpa's old filing cabinet in his study. Bertie May had warned me, "Don't just look for what's there, sugar. Look for what's missing." Midway through the second drawer, I found it. A power of attorney document, dated 1 year before his stroke. Legal. Notarized. giving my mother full authority over every decision, asset, account. My name was on it. But not the way it should have been. There I was, listed as witness to the signing. My signature, bold and cursive, except it wasn't mine. I stared at the ink, my breath short. The loop in the R was wrong. The slant off. The tail on the Q looked too stiff. Not my hand. Not my stroke. I called Bertie May. She didn't hesitate. That ain't your pen stroke. That's forged, sugar. I've seen your writing 1,000 times. I stood there in Grandpa's study, holding a legal lie. She hadn't just tried to rewrite history, she'd forged it. The next morning, I drove to her rental on Cedar Lane. Parked out front. Took a deep breath. Went in. She opened the door in slippers, robe tied tight. "Didn't know you knew how to knock," she said. I didn't reply. I held up the POA. "How long have you been pretending I didn't exist?" She looked at the paper like it was a grocery list. Then smirked. "You wouldn't have known what to do with that kind of responsibility anyway." I could have shouted. I didn't. I hit record on the phone in my jacket pocket. And asked again. Clear. Calm. "Why did you forge my name?" Her eyes narrowed. "You always were dramatic." I let her keep talking, every word like a brick in a wall she didn't know she was building. When she noticed the phone, her face tightened. "I'm done being quiet," I said. "And I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." She tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway. I walked out, closed the door behind me. At home, I returned to Grandpa's study. Locked the forged document inside a separate envelope. Wrote, "Court," across the front. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a formal complaint. Timeline, notes, screenshots, audio file, everything. Bertie May helped fill the gaps, told me which language mattered most. The emotional part was already over. What came next? That was all strategy. Before bed, I thumbed through Grandpa's Bible again. A note fell from between Psalms. "Never mistake silence for peace. Speak, even if your voice shakes." I read it twice. Then I sat down and spoke into the recorder on my phone. I am no longer the quiet one. Later that night, as I poured a glass of water and was heading to bed, my phone lit up. Unknown number. Voicemail followed by a second call. I answered. A smooth, cold voice said, "This is Alan Treadwell, representing your parents. We're prepared to offer a settlement, out of court. Substantial. On the condition that you drop all claims and never speak publicly." He paused, waited for me to answer. I didn't. I hung up. Stood in the dark kitchen. That silence? That was the sound of their fear, not my peace. The email came in before sunrise. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee, flipping through my notes one more time, when the headline popped up on my phone. LaCroix family feud. Granddaughter accused of exploiting Grandpa's estate. Below it, a photo of me, mid-blink, awkward, out of context, taken without my knowledge. And there, in bold, a quote from Cyrus. "She's only taking what's not hers." I read it once, then again. My stomach clenched like it used to in 6th grade when I forgot my locker combo. That same sick twist of shame and helplessness. But this time, I wasn't a child waiting to be let back in. I closed the laptop, sat up straight, and whispered to no one, "I will not leave my name in someone else's mouth." By the time I got to the courthouse, it was just past 8 a.m. The air still carried that Midwest bite, too cold for spring, but too bright to be winter. I stood outside courtroom 3B, staring at the polished brass letters on the plaque. People buzzed past in small packs. Whispers floated down the hallway. My name again. My family's last name, and this time, not in legacy, but in litigation. They arrived together. Celeste and Alistair, pressed suits, coordinated tones, that rehearsed air of innocence. Her heels clicked in perfect rhythm. His cologne filled the corridor like fog. They smiled at the reporters. I clutched the folder tighter. Inside, Grandpa's letter to my birth mother. The fake POA. The photo of the community builders plaque with my name missing. Receipts of the erasure. I could feel Grandpa's voice echo in my chest. "Speak. Even if your voice shakes." The bailiff opened the door. "Quince versus LaCroix Estate," he announced. I stepped in. The courtroom smelled like paper and disappointment. Bertie May sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, eyes calm but ready. She took the stand first. I worked that farm 26 years. Raised more corn than arguments, she said, smiling just a little. And I'll tell you this, that girl didn't just show up. She kept that land breathing when Harold couldn't. The opposing lawyer stood. Slick haircut. Overconfident voice. Miss May, is it true that Miss Quince has no formal agricultural degree? No financial certification? Bertie raised an eyebrow. Sir, when did feeding your family require a diploma? A few people in the gallery chuckled. The lawyer looked annoyed. He turned to me next. Miss Quince, is it your belief that sentiment entitles you to ownership? I didn't flinch. I pulled out the letter. Grandpa's words, in his hand. Laid them flat on the table. He wrote this in 1987. About me. About what he saw in me. Before any inheritance talk. Before his stroke. Long before your client decided to rewrite our lives. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Celeste stopped pretending to be bored. I caught Alistair's eye. His jaw twitched. We broke for recess. When we returned, the judge leaned forward. Exhibit A, the audio file, has been reviewed. The court accepts it into record. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't need to. Everyone had just heard her own voice say she was never supposed to be part of this. I stood. I was never the one who took, I said. I was the one who stayed. The flash of cameras outside the room lit up the window panes. The kind of light you don't forget. Cold, brutal, true. Celeste didn't meet my eyes. Her jaw set. Her hands shook slightly, though she masked it with a sip of water. I felt something ease in my chest. Not joy, not yet, but something that felt close to right. It wasn't revenge. It was just truth. Back in the hallway, I took off my blazer and exhaled hard. The press had mostly moved on. Bertie was chatting with a reporter. I turned on my phone again. A single message blinked on the screen. Unknown number. You played your hand. Now we play ours. No name, no context. Just threat, plain and dry. I stared at the words. Then at the blinking cursor in the reply box. And I realized. Winning this round didn't close the chapter. It opened the next one. I was cleaning up coffee rings off the old kitchen counter when I saw the sedan ease up the drive. No one ever comes uninvited to Blythe Farm anymore, not since court started. I stepped out to the porch just as Whitman Drayton unfolded himself from the driver's seat. Same suit, same tired eyes, but this time his face held no polite distance, just the kind of look you wear when the truth's finally too heavy to carry any longer. He handed me a leather briefcase without a word, then finally said, "Your grandfather trusted I'd know when to give you this. Today's that day." Inside, a sealed manila envelope with only one thing written in Grandpa's blocky script. Exhibit B. A cassette tape. Label read, H. Quince, April 9, 2000. I popped it into the old player in the back room, the one that never quite got unplugged. The tape hissed, then Grandpa's voice, frail but firm. If you're hearing this, I failed to protect what mattered. Skip the lawyers. Find the truth. There was a pause, then a crackle, then another voice. My mother. I will not let her ruin what I built. That farm doesn't belong to her. It belongs to me, to my legacy. I stood frozen, not out of shock, but from the recognition. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, chosen. I replayed the tape in my car under the street lamp behind the courthouse parking lot. Copied the audio, sent it to Whitman, texted Bertie May one word. Done. The next morning, courtroom 3B felt different. The air inside had weight to it. Not from the media, or the judge, or the press flashes going off like fireflies, but from something deeper. Truth, maybe. I stepped in, holding the tape. Celeste was already there. Pearl earrings, gray suit, lips tight. She looked through me. The court was quiet. Then the judge nodded. I stepped forward. My name is Verena Quince. I was not forgotten. I was not an accident. I was erased, and I am done letting others hold the pen. I placed the recorder on the desk and pressed play. The room filled with Grandpa's voice. Then hers. No spin, no edits, just raw audio. When it ended, no one spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. The kind that stretches across generations. The kind that clears a field. Later that afternoon, the gavel fell. Motion approved. Forgery invalidated. My name reinstated. Outside, the Iowa wind swept past like it always had, but something in it felt different. Back home, I stood on the porch of the farmhouse, holding Grandpa's pocket watch. That old silver thing, scratched but still ticking. I ran my thumb over it like I used to when I was a kid, sitting on his lap after harvest. Time doesn't just pass, Ren. It remembers. I closed it and slid it into my coat pocket. I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was being remembered. That night, I made tea and sat by the window, watching dusk settle. My phone buzzed. New email. No sender name. Subject line. They never answered for this. I opened it. An attachment. A document. Page after page of names. Signatures. My name, not there. And I knew then. The courtroom was just one storm. There were still shadows that hadn't spoken. Weeks after the verdict, everything slowed down. The reporters packed up. Neighbors went back to their routines. Nobody whispered anymore at the hardware store. The farm finally stopped echoing with court talk. I sat alone on the porch swing one hot afternoon, listening to the wind moving through the corn. The same fields I once buried my shame in. Now they just existed. Not symbols, not burdens, just land and sky. Bertie May showed up unannounced, as she did when words weren't needed. She handed me a jar of peach jam, homemade, label handwritten. "You did right, sugar," she said, sitting down beside me. Not many stand tall when the wind's that mean. I let out a slow breath. Standing tall doesn't mean I didn't shake. She smiled like she'd been waiting to hear that. That's when I knew, courage and fear don't cancel each other out. They dance. And some days, they hold hands. 3 days later, my phone rang. Whitman Drayton's voice, soft and solemn. Court clerk found something, tucked behind a stack of outdated files. Handwritten, sealed, dated 1 week before he passed. He overnighted it. I held the envelope in my hands that night like it might fall apart if I breathed too hard. It smelled faintly of tobacco and dust. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. It was Grandpa's handwriting. "If they come for what's yours, let them. But never let them take your peace. Peace, Ren, that's the only thing nobody can steal unless you hand it over." I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I just sat there holding it, feeling the ink press against my fingers like it still had a pulse. It wasn't about property. Never was. It was about the story I'd refused to let them finish for me. A week later, Mom pulled into the gravel drive. Unannounced. Not even a honk. She stepped out, hands at her sides. She didn't bring a purse, didn't wear makeup. Just stood by the hood of her car like she wasn't sure she belonged anywhere anymore. I met her halfway. She didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to. She said, "You always reminded me of him. That's why I couldn't stand you." I stared at her a second longer than comfort allowed. Then said, "Then maybe you just needed to remember him better." She looked past me, said nothing, then turned and left. Just like that. And for the first time, I didn't want her to say more. Silence didn't hurt this time. It just settled. That was its own kind of closure. By late August, I'd made a decision. We started a small fund, Grandpa's name on the paperwork, not mine. A scholarship for local kids who wanted to study agriculture but couldn't afford the dream. We held the first meeting at the church hall, the same place my mother once whispered her bitterness into my ear. This time, the air was clean. I stood up and faced the crowd. We don't get to choose where we start. But we can sure choose who we become after. Bertie May stood in the back, arms crossed, proud as a sunrise. The light caught the edge of the window just right, soft and golden. The silver pocket watch ticked in my coat pocket, a steady rhythm. Not a countdown, not a bomb. Just time, still moving. That night, I sat at my desk. The sun had gone down, but the room glowed with quiet. Grandpa's photo sat beside the watch. I kept time my way. "Grandpa," I whispered. Then came the knock. I walked to the door. Found a padded envelope on the mat. No return address. I opened it carefully. Inside, a cassette tape. Label read, "Copy, Trust Addendum." I held it in my hand for a while. Then smiled, faintly. Looks like time still has something left to say.